to see if it actually works.
Are we live? Is that us?
So hello, I think we should be live, and apparently we've been live for about 10 seconds. Although I can see on the little eye counter, can you see the eye counter? That there's no one actually joined us. So although there's people kind of waiting for the stream to start, it doesn't look like they've joined us quite yet.
Okay.
But this is being recorded, so people can catch up if they need to. We'll just give it, I don't know, 2 minutes just to see if any more are going to join. You okay with that?
Okay. Yep, fine. No
I
push.
kind of see what happens. So I've got a little oh, there we go. I've got 4 eyes now, so there should be 4 people watching us. So hi mum.
Yep.
And my wife.
Could be my kids in the other room.
and your 2 kids. So there we go. Oh, I've tested the stream. Okay, so I've tested that on my iPad. I can hear both of us, so that should be all working fine. Hello and welcome everyone. If you want to, although don't feel you have to, it might be helpful if you just pop in the comment, firstly, if you're from the UK, because that's always helpful to know, because I know I've got quite a few subscribers to both my channels who are in America, but that will just help us figure out where to pitch this. If you've got any specific questions for us in terms of life as a CBT therapist, then please feel free to pop a question into the chat. You can do that now. You can do that as we're going along. You can do it if the question pops into your head at any point, then put it into the chat and we'll do our best to answer it. Please be mindful that if we share a question through this software, it will pop up on the screen and it will also pop up with your YouTube username. So if there's anything sensitive in there or that you don't particularly want to share on the stream, then please just bear that in mind, that it will be seen. We've got someone called Mana from California. Hi, Mana from California. How hot is it in California right now? Because here in England, it has been 26 degrees today. I don't know what it is now, but it feels like it is absolutely boiling.
Yeah.
Where are you, Christian? You in Birmingham?
Yeah, and it's warm. I realised that Californians is going to sound like it's winter, but you have to convert it. For England, you can add another 25 degrees on. That's what it feels like. Whatever's too hot for you, that's where we are.
Yeah, yeah, it has felt really hot today. And I have the luxury of my kids being out in the garden, playing on the trampoline and screaming their heads off. So I've had to shut all of the windows. So it is quite literally turning into a bit of a sweatbox in here, which is really nice and pleasant. So we've still got 4 people. We've been going for 3 minutes. I think what we could start doing is looking at some of the questions that were sent in through the Reddit post, and have a look through some of that. I've managed to put them into a spreadsheet so I can share them on the screen. We'll come up, perhaps. Do you think it's worthwhile just spending a couple of minutes, Christian, just like quick introductions, what our background is, kind of core profession, what kind of post-grad stuff we did, and where we're working now, and perhaps some of that experience? Do you think that's okay?
Yep, definitely.
Hi, Beth. Thanks for stopping by, saying hello. Hope you enjoy this. Beth, are you UK, America? I can't remember. There's a bit of a delay on this as well. I think there's like a 10-second delay, so bear that in mind. So while Beth might be typing to me, which I can't tell, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go?
Yep, introduce yourself and then I'll
Okay, so as most people probably know, my name's Stuart. I have this YouTube channel called Therapy in Action, and from London, cool. And I think the purpose of this YouTube channel, I called it Therapy in Action, partly because it's a play on the word ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is what I tend to use as my main modality. And also I like this word action, meaning that we actually do something. So there's lots of channels out there which are around psychoeducation, talking about theory. But for me, I think the most important thing is people get something that they can actively do with that information to, I don't know, improve their lives, meet their goals, or whatever it is they want to achieve. So that's what this channel is all about. As you can see, there's lots of ACT information on there at the moment. There's a whole ACT playlist. which goes through the main parts of ACT for people to start to kind of get to grips with. And there's some exercises per part on the channel. And it is now moving more into a trauma focus playlist, because that's the area that I work in. That's what I'm doing my PhD in. And there's loads of information that I want to share with people. So it's going to take that direction for a little while. But again, I want it to be actionable. I want it to be things that people can take away and actually do, whether you're working with people who've experienced trauma or whether you've experienced trauma yourself and you are looking at healing. So that's what this channel is about. So my core profession is registered mental health nurse with the NMC. I trained as a nurse in the British Army, which is where I met Christian. And what that meant was doing the standard 3-year degree at university, and then working in a department of community mental health within the military as a community psychiatric nurse, as a CPN. During that journey, psychiatric nursing was very different in the military than what you get in the NHS. You know, there's no inpatient work for a start. It was all community based. And we were finding more and more that we were dealing with kind of anxiety and depression type problems. And that led to further training in CBT and EMDR. At that point, after a few years, I left the military and was fortunate enough to get on the postgrad diploma in CBT, which was then known as the IAPT course, which was 12 months. And during that course, I worked 3 days a week on clinical placement in a 16 to 25-year-old service delivering CBT. I then, once I completed that, I started, well, whilst I was there, actually, whilst I was doing my postgrad CBT, I actually also completed a master's in psychology, which I'd started in the military and had left the military with, and it was ongoing. So I had to do both of them at the same time. So I ended up in this position where I had completed the CBT postgrad. I had a year left of my master's in psychology. Now, that master's in psychology is what is known as a conversion course, because when I left the military, I thought, I think I want to be a clinical psychologist. And because my undergrad, my nursing degree, was obviously in nursing, I couldn't apply for a doctorate in clinical psychology because I didn't have what's called GBC, which is a graduate basis for chartership, which you need in order to apply for the clinical doctorate. So I spent ages working out how I could get GBC, worked out that you can do this thing called a psychology conversion master's, which I then did through Manchester. And that went well, completed it fine. And then I was in a position where I could start applying for clinical doctorate courses, or Insight Ds. However, during that process, I became very fond in my role as a CBT therapist. I had moved into a kind of a complex trauma service, working as part of CAMS, and I was loving it, and I enjoyed it so much that I thought, I don't want to be a clinical psychologist anymore. I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing. I had gone part-time. I was working 3 days a week for the NHS. I was working 2 days on a private practice and doing other things. And I thought, hey, my life is pretty cool right now. I don't want to change anything. And I decided not to apply for the doctorate course. I did, however, want to continue my my learning journey and my education around not specifically CBT, but more with a focus on trauma, because I was working in a complex trauma service. I had loads of questions about trauma that I felt hadn't been answered in the literature. So I decided to take my learning journey further and applied for a PhD, a research PhD, to the University of Chester, which I'm still currently doing. I'm in my 4th year, hoping to finish next year. And that will probably formally be the end of my kind of academic journey, which has been going on for about 15 years. I think I've been a student literally for about 15 years. And that needs to end at some point. Not that I'll stop learning, but it's getting really expensive. And yeah, so I think that's me. I think that's kind of everything you need to know to get us going. So it's been quite an interesting journey. Christian, do you want to give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, so mine's similar. So yeah, we met in the army, didn't we? So I was that's where I was trained to be a mental health nurse, working in community mental health teams in the military in uniform. During that, while I was there, working again with that population, I wanted to enhance my skills, because what you were doing in the military community mental health team was very much working with people in terms of low-level interventions, and it felt like I needed to expand my education and my skill set. So I moved on to being a therapist. So that was EMDR and CBT at that time. So whilst I was in the military, and in the community mental health team there, I did my training at Birmingham Uni to become a CBT therapist. And as part of that particular course there, the guy who's leading it, called Rich Bennett, big in the ACT world, very much infused that course with lots of ACT stuff. So I guess we'll maybe talk a little bit about ACT as we go along. So right from the start, I've kind of had a sense of CBT as an umbrella term for lots of sort of different therapies that fit with under that, and I've sort of tried to understand and sort of build my skills around that. So yeah, so with a kind of broad sense of what CBT is and therapy. So yeah, after a few years, again, much like yourself, Stu, I left. I went to work. I had decided by that stage, I had also thought about becoming a clinical psychologist, but I'd also reached a stage with a family where I really couldn't afford the pay cut to go and do the training. So for me, it was very much about being a therapist in the NHS. So I did do some locum stuff for an IAP service briefly, but I moved straight into sort of secondary care. I did a little bit in tertiary care, so hospitals, and working a lot more with sort of in both secondary care and tertiary, working with complex trauma, which is as opposed to what traditionally IAP should be working with, which is sort of mild to moderate common mental health problems. So finding myself working with more complex problems. It's a strange word, complex, isn't it? But I guess more in-depth problems, more time and space to kind of work with it. And with some good supervision, I was able to kind of develop myself along those roads. And from there, I moved into a bit of kismet, really. The NHS had a bit of thinking around veteran services, came up with something called Op Courage, which is very much is the veterans pathway within the NHS. And that was all established around about within 2 or 3 years of me coming out of the army. Until I moved into there to work. I worked within what was called their complex treatment service, again, working with veterans who struggle with complex trauma, essentially. I would say it doesn't have to be complex trauma, but I would say about 99% of people there have a whole trauma history that starts from childhood, through the military, after the military, and that's where I spend my time in my day job. And alongside that, I have a little bit of private work that I go along in terms of supervision, training, and a little bit sort of seeing private clients. So that's what I do work-wise. As well as yourself, Stu, I'm doing a doctorate as we go along. My doctorate my research relates to veterans. So it's about understanding what it is to provide a veteran-sensitive service. There's a lot of talk about meeting veterans' needs, so I'm sort of trying to research around that and thinking, well, yeah, how do we meet their needs holistically? So psychologically, absolutely. We're applying these different treatments, different interventions. How do we do that in a way that meets veterans' needs? Because we've got a whole service now that exists for them. And so there's maybe not as much sort of research around how to do that. So that's what I'm trying to establish. I guess traditionally, veterans have struggled to engage in mainstream services, which is why Op Courage exists, and which is why I'm now trying to think a bit about what that means and how we do it in a way that actually is sensitive to what they're doing. So yeah, so become started as a nurse in the military, done my training as a therapist, continue to sort of develop along that, working in complex trauma, and now, much like yourself, taking a slightly further academic route, and trying to pull all that together to build a sort of career in a particular sort of niche part of the therapy world. That's me, pretty much.
It suddenly sounds a lot, doesn't it? When you lay it all out.
Yeah,
Although it
well,
does feel like it's gone quick.
yeah, it feels about 5 minutes, but actually, that's years to get to that stage.
Yeah. So I can see that we've got another couple of people who've joined us. Beth's asked, I'm sure Beth is okay if I put this on the screen. Stuart, what made you choose the University of Chester? I know that you knew very well. It is opposite to my middle school. I went growing up and was my college when I was growing up. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, so I know with some of the questions that have been sent in through the Reddit posts that I put out, they're kind of divided into how do you become a CBT therapist? What's the postgrad diploma in CBT like, as in the actual course? And then there's a few questions about private practice and a few questions about PhD. So what you're touching upon there, Beth, is the kind of the PhD part, because that's where I'm currently studying is at the University of Chester. Excuse me. And it wasn't anything specifically about Chester, I don't think, that drew me to it. Kind of within the university itself, it was more to do with the supervisor. So what I had done, and I think this is probably the same for most people who choose to do a PhD, you think of an area that you want to study. So for me, I wanted to study this idea of trauma-informed services, because this word trauma-informed services, or this phrase, gets used a lot. But from my experience, services, it's not a very well-defined concept. It's not measured very well. Outcomes aren't measured very well. And actually, everyone seems to be doing something completely different. And I wanted to try and consolidate that somehow into a framework that people could refer to. So because I kind of knew my research area, it meant I could go to various university websites, and I think I'll probably use LinkedIn to some extent, to see what supervisors, what professors, associate professors and lecturers were about who were in a position to supervise me in that area. And that led me to shortlist, I can't remember now, it was 3 or 4 universities, of which I liked the look of supervisors because they had researched in the area that I wanted to study. They had published themselves in the area that I wanted to study. So I reached out to all of them, pitched them my idea, see if they had availability for me, see how long it was going to take for the recruitment process, or also the kind of the admin process to get in. And I landed on University of Chester. I have a very good principal supervisor called Professor Andrew Reeves, and his support and his guidance has been amazing. And I chose the university based on him. So yeah, that's how I've ended up at Chester. And that's not to take away anything from any of the other potential supervisors that I contacted, in case they randomly happened to see this. They were all very good. I just went on the person who seemed almost equally as passionate about my question as I did. And I felt that is what I needed. So yeah, I ended up at the University of Chester. I mean, I say I'm at the University of Chester, it's because I'm doing a research PhD and I'm researching the area that I work in. There's no taught element of that course. So I don't actually have to go to the university for anything. I'm not taught anything. There's no modules. It's literally years and years of self-study and just cracking on with the research. So I've never been to Chester. In the brochure that I get sent every year, it's like a very nice place. I believe it takes about 6 hours to get there from here. So, I'll probably go up for my Viva. But I'm sure it's a very beautiful city. I think that probably answers your question. Let's have a look what else we have. Where are you doing your PhD, Christian, or your doctorate?
Yeah, University of Central Lancashire. And again, I did it through a DProf, so which is a professional doctorate. So the reason I did that is because I didn't have a research background. So there was a taught element in the first part. So where I did a lot of research modules and learned how to do that because I didn't have the background. And then from then, once you've done part one, part two is the bit that you're doing, which is where I'm at now in terms of actually doing the research. So I chose it on that basis, as I felt I needed to skill up.
Right. Let me. Oh no, that's not right. So this question is too long to fit in the question box. It's shouting at me, but I can do it as a ticker. So that means it will scroll along the bottom. So can you tell us more about your PhD, area of study, and what was the admission process like? I'm coming from a completely different field, mathematics, but psychology is what I always loved. I was looking to apply for PhD programs next year. Would love to hear from your experience. So I think I've kind of explained how I started, came up with the research question, went out and looked for supervisors, found a supervisor, and then I started the admissions process. What that looked like in practical terms was I had to write a research purpose, which you can find many examples of online if you just do a search, which basically outlines what you want to do, why you want to do it, and how are you going to do it. That gets submitted. My experience was then I met a board, a panel of I think it was three or four lecturers who asked me about my research proposal. So I said research purpose earlier, didn't I? I meant research proposal. Asked me some questions about, again, what was covered in there, why I was doing it, how I was going to do it, what I wanted to achieve from it. And I'm not sure exactly what they're looking for within that process. I think they just want to see, I don't know, how you articulate what you want to do, whether it's actually achievable in terms of ethics, in terms of in the time frame. I did have to submit a copy of my thesis from my psychology masters so they could see an example of my academic writing. And then a few days later, I got a letter through saying, "Yep, accepted onto the course," and that was it. I just pretty much started. I'm not sure what it's like, so I can see from your question that I'm coming from a completely different field. I'm not sure from an academic perspective, because you don't obviously have to be a therapist to do a PhD. You know, me doing a PhD and me being a CBT therapist, you know, they don't have to kind of coexist at the same time. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the academic process of if you want to do a PhD in a field that's completely different to your other postgrad work in terms of a master's. No, Christian, have you got any thoughts?
No. Again, mine's related. So my doctorate is psychotherapy. So it's specifically in that field. But again, I think most people on my doing it alongside me are therapists. But it doesn't have to be so. We're not learning new skills to be therapists. We're researching areas that are related to psychotherapy. So in my case, how we make that sensitive to veterans. But so yeah, I did. It's outside of my expertise to think about how you switch between different fields.
Yeah, I guess my advice would be probably what you've already considered is write a research proposal, send it off to some universities and just see what the feedback is. Because within that, they'll expect you to kind of outline your previous academic experience, and then I think you'll quickly find whether it's going to be an issue or not. See what they have to say. So I was just pausing there because I'm thinking, I wonder if this question is actually around a research PhD or more around the clinical psychology doctorate, which is a very different type of kind of doctorate course to a PhD. I would probably take a look at the Clearinghouse website. If you Google Clearinghouse Psychology, you'll get a website which has got loads of information about accessing clinical psychology programs in terms of inclusion criteria and what you need. That's probably your best thing to look at. My understanding, thinking about this, is where I got stuck, which was I didn't have GBC, so that's a graduate basis for chartership, which is what is required to enter onto a clinical psychology doctorate, as far as I'm aware. You won't have that from a mathematics degree. So what you could potentially do is a conversion course similar to what I did, because although nursing and psychology kind of sound like they could be related because they're both mental healthy, in the eyes of everything, they're not. They're two completely distinct things. So my mental health nursing degree was in a completely different field to psychology, which is why I had to do the conversion course. I think that's probably as much as we can talk about that. We're not kind of experts in this, but hopefully that points you in the right direction or gives you kind of something to think about.
It would probably be worth finding a psychologist or speaking to uni about it, because it's not just about the academic qualifications. You do need those, but I'm very aware of the hoops that people jump through to get onto those courses, and usually involves getting quite a lot of experience. People work as assistant psychologists, or they work as healthcare assistants in mental health settings in order to get some experience in advance of the settings before they go for an interview for the psychology clinical psychology course. It's pretty competitive, not because people aren't good enough to get on it, because there's so few places and an awful lot of people would like to do it. So it is, sadly, as I guess anybody who's watching this who's tried it knows, it's a pretty competitive course to get on. So you really do have to pad out your CV quite some way.
Yeah, I get a bit frustrated sometimes when I see LinkedIn and there's a time of year where you get loads of people saying, oh, I've been rejected from the clinical psychology course again. And they seem really deflated, and some of them seem really, really, really disappointed, as you'd expect. But some of the posts seem a bit stronger than disappointment to the fact that they're ready to just kind of, give in with the whole process. And I always kind of think, consider, CBT therapy, because it's arguably a simpler route to get in, and it might just give you what you want in terms of your own values and what you're looking for in a career. And that's kind of what motivated me to do this stream. I have, so just let me just quickly share my screen, because for those who don't know, there's this really good website called let's see if I can share this, called it's clearinghouse.org.uk, and within that, if I go to home, so this is the website for postgraduate courses in clinical psychology. This gives you everything that you need to know, all about how to apply, around the funding, what universities are actually doing the courses. And so if I go back, so within that, I've gone to the academic qualifications part. So this outlines what GBC is. So this is what I didn't have as a nurse, which I needed to apply for the clinical psychology doctorate when that's what I thought I wanted to do. So as you can see, GBC is a standard set by the BPS. It ensures that before anyone starts a clinical psych course, they have already studied psychology in enough breadth and depth to give a strong basis for their postgrad training. So if you don't have a psychology undergrad and you want to apply for the ClinPsych D, then you need to do some form of GBC. And from my understanding, the most common way to do that is through a psychology conversion course. Let's see if I can just find the one that I did at MMU. Okay, so what those courses look like is this. So this is Manchester Metropolitan University course. This is where I did the conversion course, and this is that they all state it the same way. So it's an MSc in psychology with conversion in brackets. And what you'll see here, this might be a bit small for people to see, but in the course overview, it says achieve graduate basis for chartered membership, the first step to becoming a chartered psychologist. So this is what people need to aim for. And that's what I ended up doing. And it was quite a good course, actually, that one. Right. Let me stop sharing that. Hopefully that has pointed some people in a direction that could be handy for them. Let me find my list of questions. Obviously in the chat, in the comments, if you've got any questions as we go along, even if you're not an aspiring CBT therapist, but you want to know more about what we've been through and what it's like, feel free to leave a question, because it's probably a question that other people have. Right. Let's have a look at this question. Let me put it in here. Sorry, because I need to copy and paste it from a spreadsheet. This is a very similar question. How would you go about becoming a therapist? I did a degree in science, but I feel drawn to mental health. So this is kind of the same question, but not clinical psychology doctorate, becoming a therapist. Christian, you want to give some thoughts? I appreciate I've been talking for a while. Have a bit of a drink.
So, therapist is a broad term, isn't it? So that's not just CBT. There are lots of sort of. I guess at this point we can sort of talk about very briefly that none of this, being a psychotherapist or a counsellor, is not a regulated, as not statutory regulated profession in the UK, which means pretty much anybody can call themselves that. And there are 1,000,001, slight exaggeration, but there are many, many varying levels of courses that you could do, from people who do a weekend 2-day workshop and then go off to call themselves a therapist, that get their £15 diploma in CBT that I see come through on the adverts on Facebook for me to go on, and then they call themselves CBT therapist, through to full-blown postgrad qualifications and master's degrees. The short answer to that is you could do it in many different ways. If you're thinking sort of coming along the road where you'd want to work in potentially working like the NHS, or work in how can I put this politely, a place that's going to have a degree of rigor about the qualifications that you're going to come with, then it's going to be some sort of degree that's going to do that for you. So there are undergraduate counselling and psychotherapy courses. There are postgraduate psychotherapy courses like the kind that me and Stuart did. What's the distinction there? We talked about core profession before. So lots of people will come along and get onto those courses. The most simple route is, and this won't be your route if you've got a degree in a different field, is to have a core profession like nursing or social work or something similar. And then they can then apply for, that's their undergraduate degree. And then with that experience, they can then take that onto a postgraduate degree to learn a specific therapy like CBT. For other people, and I'm immediately blanking on what it's called, but they complete a portfolio of skills by working in different areas. So if they were to get a job as a assistant, well, it wouldn't be assistant psychology degree, but some sort of job within the mental health thing, they can pick up skills, they can fill a portfolio in and demonstrate that they've got some experience that is relevant to the postgrad course. And on that basis, they can get on there. So I know that I've met through IAPT somebody who was a teacher beforehand and not a psychology teacher, so it was something unrelated. And they did their CBT degree, and they were working in IAPT, what's now NHS talking therapies. So it is doable, but there are lots of different routes to it. That might have been a bit quick. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I'm just having a look because you talked about so there's loads of routes, isn't there? Let's, in terms of CBT, because that's probably where we're best placed to answer this. I mean, like you said, there's lots of different therapies. I initially, prior to looking at CBT, I had a look at integrative therapy courses, especially in the Midlands. So kind of Newman University, I think BCU might have ran a course. Those courses were about 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years. And what prevented me from applying for them, and that's not to take anything away from people who are integrative therapists, was purely when I looked at NHS jobs, I thought there's not as many jobs available for integrative psychologists than there are, psychotherapists, than there are for CBT therapists. And I had an eye on what am I going to do for work at the end of this. And that was a huge deciding factor. So when you apply to be when you think about becoming a CBT therapist, you've got a few choices. You can go and do a BABCP. So they're the accrediting body of CBT therapists. You can go and do one of their accredited courses. And what that essentially means is the university that you attend, their course has been accredited by the BABCP. So you effectively do the course, submit a portfolio of work at the end of what you've done on that course, and then you get your accreditation. And that's simply the process. In order to do that, you require what Christian has referred to as a core profession. Now, if we take a look at the BABCP website, they tell us the definition of a core profession. So we can have a quick look at that. So these are what the BABCP considers a core professions. Oh no, it's not. That's not the list, is it? There's the list. Let me find the list. This one. So core profession list. So the professions listed here have had a substantial amount of mental health training and meet the accreditation requirements for knowledge and experience in mental health. So this means you've got enough previous experience to come onto the course. So as you can see, it's art therapists, counselors, people who work in medicine, nurses, which is what Christian and I were or still are. So we fulfill the criteria there. Occupational therapy, people with a psychotherapy and psychotherapeutic counseling background, social workers, clinical and counseling psychologists, ed psychologists, health psychs, forensic psychs. So basically, if you're a qualified psychologist or a chartered psychologist, then you would meet the criteria to go into the CBT course. If you don't meet any of them, then you can do what Christian alluded to is the KSA, which is essentially a portfolio of work that outlines. Is this sharing? No, not yet. Okay, let me share this tab. So this is the KSA. So this is the equivalent to having a core profession. And it's essentially a portfolio that you complete that meets certain criteria to show that you have experience in, what does it say? A KSA portfolio has a number of criteria which demonstrates training and experience in a mental health or related background. This criteria must all be met by every applicant. So like Christian said, if you're a teacher, but say you have extensive experience working in pastoral care, then you might meet the criteria under the KSA portfolio to come onto the course. So we're obviously not going to go into detail about this, but this is where you find the information. It's on the BABC website. There's all the guidelines here. There's example of the portfolio, so you can see exactly what needs to go into it, and you can get more information there as you wish. Is there anything else we need to talk about in terms of the BABCP? Oh, there's this. So that was to get on an accredited course. Let's say you've got onto a CBT course that isn't accredited by the BABCP. Then there's the information here about how you can then become accredited. So these are the steps. Check if you have a core profession, as we've just discussed. And if not, you need to complete the KSA, as we've just discussed. Consult the minimum training standards. Now, we're not going to go into this, but the minimum training standards outlines what the course you have done covers to make sure it covers what the BABCP expect it to cover. And that includes how many hours the course was, how much was taught by another therapist, how much was kind of self-study. I think there's probably a part about clinical experience and clinical practice in there as well. But again, if you click on this, it will give you all of the criteria. And then, yeah, if you meet all of that, you can apply using the accreditation form with the BABCP.
Yeah, it's probably worth just saying if you've got the choice of going on an accredited course versus a non-accredited course, I would go on the accredited course because the level of faff that's going to be involved in trying to meet these criteria after the fact, and you've already paid for your course. It's just easier. It's included in an accredited course. There isn't any more to prove. You do your hours as part of it. You do your logs, and provisional accreditation, if that's what they still call it, is part of the deal. Whereas it's a much longer route if you take a non-accredited course. This is really people who've already done that and then need to find a route in.
If we have a look on the BABCP website still, then you can see here BABC course accreditation. And if you go down to this here, level 2 accredited courses, that's where everything's included. If you click on that, it will show you all the universities who are currently accredited to deliver the accredited course. So we went to University of Birmingham, although at different times. Oh, are they not on there anymore, Christian? University.
They should be.
Oh, can't see them on there. Unless it's under B, Birmingham?
It's Birmingham University. There you go.
Birmingham University, there we go.
That would have been a shock had they lost their accreditation.
Yeah, so they call it the postgraduate program in cognitive behavioral psychotherapy. Fine, so there we go. This will give you all of the universities that are worth checking out in the first instance. Okay, where shall we go next? Shall we talk about the difference between being accredited or not accredited in terms of work?
Well, yep, can briefly. I think then probably a good idea then talk about why you would want to do this as an alternative to clinical psychology course.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, okay. In fact, let's go there next, and then that will probably lead better into kind of looking at the difference in job specs on NHS jobs.
Yep.
As you can tell, everyone, this is we didn't prepare anything for this because we wanted it to be mainly led by interaction and by questions. We didn't want to kind of lead it ourselves and just tell you stuff that we wanted to tell you. We'd rather get you to lead it. So I was just reading the comments there. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Fubar. And that's Beth saying hi to them. Yeah, so I've had a few questions, actually. Let's have a look. So this is probably a good example. I had lots of questions very similar to this. Let me copy this so everyone can see it. How long is it? Is it going to fit in here? Right. So, hi. It could be great to hear how being a CBT therapist is similar and how it differs from clinical psychology. I'm also interested in your private practice. How was it setting it all up? So I'm in this strange position where in my service and the clinical supervision CBT group that I attend, I'm the only non-psychologist person in there. So I'm the only IAPT trained CBT therapist, and everyone else are clinical psychologists. In terms of the work that we all individually do, it's the same. We're seeing the same clients. They've got the same presentation. There's no difference there. And the modality that is being used is CBT. So really, the biggest difference that comes down to all of us is how we've been trained. And there's massive differences from what I've seen in clinical psychologist, depending on what specific university they went. So I've heard of some universities having very long CBT elements to the training of a year, perhaps, and then somewhere it's been a couple of weeks. So in my experience, the actual job role that I do with them is exactly the same. Now, I guess where it differs is there's obviously a load of psychologists within my trust who don't work for a CBT service like we do. So they'll be doing things like neurodevelopmental assessments. They'll be doing cognitive assessments. They'll perhaps be doing kind of risk assessments, or maybe some complex formulations that fall outside of what might be expected for a CBT therapist. So those are roles that as a CBT therapist, and only as a CBT therapist, I wouldn't be doing, I wouldn't be accessing. So my bread and butter job is one-to-one therapy with children and young people in a complex trauma service, delivering CBT to help them with trauma. And that's exactly what the psychologists are doing. Now, just as an aside, since I've been a CBT therapist, I have done additional training in neurodevelopmental assessments. I'm an EMDR therapist as well from my military days. I did my training there, which was done through the University of Worcester. So I also bring that into the complex trauma service. So I'm not just doing CBT, I am offering EMDR as well. But in terms of the question, in CBT land, it's exactly the same. However, the clinical psychologists have a wider range of roles that they can do compared to me. Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. Christian, what's your experience in your service?
So in my service, so we don't just do therapy, but we primarily psychology led and a formulation led service. I don't think anybody would argue with me. I'll say we're largely interchangeable. So whether it's a CBT therapist, or we've got art therapists, or we've got EMDR therapists, different kind, and the clinical psychics and counselling psychics to go along with that. We all do the same work as you do. The same clients with the same presentations, doing the same kind of work. We might, again, it's just people with a different modality, and as a team, we're working out what might be more useful with it. We might shift between that in terms of particular modalities, but in terms of, as a general rule, all the same clients, we work with all the same clients. There's no like CBT therapists see these guys, and then when they're more complicated, we go and give them to clinical psychologists. That's not how it works. We're very much on the same level, working with the same clients. Because when it comes to therapy, my CBT is the same CBT that the clinical psychologists are using. They don't have a special clinical psychology CBT that they've got some special extra magic version that only they get access to. It's the same stuff, right? So if they can do it, I can do it. And much like yourself, I've trained in EMDR, I've trained in CFT, and the CBTs within CBT. So ACT predominantly I work with. So we all do that. And you were talking about complex formulations. Well, actually, we do that within the team, and we all do that. So we have within our service a formulation group, and on a fairly regular basis, I lead that as a therapist, a senior therapist in there, working out formulations and sort of as a team thing, working it around. So we're just as involved in that as anybody else. The difference would be what a clinical psychologist can do outside of the therapy work. So they wouldn't be doing it in my service, but a clinical psychologist might have a job somewhere else, like say doing the neuropsych stuff or whatever. But when it comes to therapy, working with clients, or specifically on their mental health, we're largely doing the same job. I would struggle to put a cigarette paper between us in terms of what they do that I don't do, or what I do that they don't do. We do talk a lot about sort of training routes, so how people get to have this experience, skills, knowledge to be able to do the role that we're in. So when we're writing job application or job writing to people to apply for, right, the job roles, we try to think about that broadly now. So don't just say they have to have this specific experience. They can have a range of experience. So it might be a nurse therapist, or somebody with a different core profession, or a clinical psych that might come in. And the training route to get there in order to develop the skills they might have come from a bunch of different ways. I guess as a therapist, having a core profession and built up a bunch of skills through my nursing days as a mental health nurse provided me with a lot of skills and experience and all the stuff that goes around the therapy in terms of managing clients, risk assessment, all that kind of stuff that goes into it. I bring that from that to then do my therapy course, which scaffolds it and enables me to then use that therapy stuff safely. You wouldn't get that. I think if you were to just drop somebody onto a CBT course without, this is why they do the KSA or have a core profession, is that course won't teach you that stuff, right? So with a clinical psychologist, although lots of them have done lots of experience to get on the course, in principle, they start fresh with that. So they would be teaching them all from day one how to do all that stuff. So their training route includes all of that. Whereas a CBT therapist CBT course would not teach you all that additional scaffolding around it. That's why you need a different training route in advance of that to make you prepared to be on the course, which is a very long-winded way of saying there are lots of different ways that people develop the skills in order to do the role. So if somebody didn't know all that, they might look and go, well, the clinical psychologist is more highly trained. And you go, well, yes, their training is absolutely more in-depth and longer, but it's because they're starting from day one, week one, when they go in there. And people who come from a different background will have brought a lot of skills and experience that they can then add their therapy qualification to in order to work in a complex, work with whatever service you're in, but particularly where I work in a complex trauma service where there are going to be lots of difficult, stressful things to manage, lots of complications with what's going on for people. And it can't just be about what do I do in the room in terms of therapy? It has to be how do we understand all that additional stuff. So yeah, there was a long-winded way of going around saying the training route matters, but it's not a linear route. There are lots of different ways to get to where we are. I remember thinking if you didn't have all that experience, just coming off a CBT course. So, for example, I don't know that teacher anymore. I met her once, but if they didn't have a lot of other experience going on and they'd done the CBT course, they'd need to do a lot more experience before they came to work in a service like we work in. Yeah, my service or your service, because there's so much more you need to know. So training routes are important. The skills you pick up around it are important. So then you're in a position to then sit interchangeably with other professionals who also have a wider understanding beyond just the therapy. Not that the therapy isn't a really integral part and actually informs all the other stuff, but you need both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love my clinical psychology counterparts, especially in group supervision, because they've got so much breadth and experience, maybe not specifically to CBT, but just in terms of general kind of psychology, other interventions, because their course is so much longer than ours. They've had exposure to a wide range of clinical placements where they've obviously picked loads of stuff up from there, and they bring all of that with them. So sometimes it can be really helpful when perhaps you find yourself having a really narrow view of someone through a CBT lens, that they then bring another lens and makes you kind of think and kind of reconsider perhaps some of the formulation, and that can only be really helpful for the person, I think.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's about, if the message I don't want to send is that we're the same as they are, but in terms of the roles that we then fulfill, we bring we and they and all the different people that do those roles bring a range of experiences into that then allows them to fulfill that role. It isn't saying that because I've done this, I am the equivalent to I have the equivalent role, but I don't have the equivalent training. I just have a different training. Does that make sense? I don't think it's less.
I think it's a nice way to put it.
It's not the same. I'm not trying to pretend that we're the same. We're not the same. There's different experiences, and we need that, right? What you don't want is a service that only has one type of practitioner in it, ideally, because having that breadth, multiple different perspectives to look at a problem, look at the difficulty you're helping somebody with, that's vital.
And when I was kind of deciding on my own career path, so I didn't really think about the career. I kind of thought about what I wanted to do. And so what I knew I wanted to do was, I'd worked for so many years helping people who had experienced trauma. I thought that's what I want to do. When I leave the military, that's what I want to do. Like, I don't really care what form it takes, in what specific service. It was, I want to help people as best as I can overcome trauma, heal from trauma. And I was looking at ways I could do that. And my initial thought was clinical psychology, that's where it's at. But as I went through my master's and my CBT career was kind of progressing, I found myself in the job I'm in now, because I've been there for years, thinking, hold on, those kind of values I had, those kind of aims and objectives I had about helping people with trauma, I'm literally sat here now doing it. I'm doing the job I want to do. And then I thought, okay, but in the back of my mind, I've got this clinical psychology thing I want to go and do. But actually now, then I was kind of in my 30s, and I'm in my 40s now. I was in my 30s, I was married, I had kids, and I was thinking, if I go on the clinical psychology course, I'm back into relatively inflexible clinical placements for a 3-year doctorate. I'm back in the world of assignments and submitting those things. Everything's new again. I'll find myself in placements which aren't related to trauma, which is where I want to be working. And I thought, this is going to actually take me away from where I want to be right now. And it was really, upon reflection, it was really difficult for me to not apply for the clinical psychology course, because it's so competitive and it's got such a, what's the word? Like, it's highly regarded.
Status, cachet.
Status, yeah. And you get the doctor title out of it, which obviously you don't have as a CBT therapist. It was surprisingly difficult for me to make the decision not to apply for that.
Yeah.
But I guess it was some value guided action in the end, and I thought, and family reasons, and so personal and professional choice. I stayed where I am. What were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say exactly that, which is, if we take the view of what is it you want to be able to do, if you want to be doing neuropsychology assessments, then yes, you need to do that training, right? If that's where you want to spend your time. But if really what you want to be is a therapist of some degree, and particularly want to, so lots of people do, they do the clinical psychology course, but really what they want to be day to day is a therapist. I think there's something about the research element is the bit that gives them their doctor, doesn't call them doctor. Most of the training, I would suggest, is sort of at a master's level training, and then they do the research bit that goes on top of it. But that, yeah, what I was going to say, I think the average number of research papers your average clinical psychologist produces is one, right? So they do the one that they did to get their course. And, so they didn't really want to be researchers. They wanted to be therapists for lots of people. And you go, okay, well, if that's really what you wanted, I mean, there are other things you could do, but there's probably other ways to build that if that particular route isn't open to you, or it feels like it's not the right route for you at the moment. There's nothing I can think of particularly. So I want to work in trauma. I love working in trauma. I love doing training. I love doing supervision. I love disseminating that work out. I do consultation for different teams around trauma and around veterans work. There's nothing I can think of that within that remit that I can't do with the qualifications I've got. I don't need to be a clinical psychologist for that. I've never had an issue in terms of people contacting our team for consultations and I'm going, well, why am I talking to a CBT therapist? Why am I not talking to a clinic? That's never happened. People, you bring the weight of experience that you have, and people are very open to it. And I regularly consult with people who are clinical psychologists, but they don't work in my bit, right? And they're very happy to talk to you about what it is that you know, because that's just how we work. Right? In the same way that I'm very happy to, if I need advice and consultation from somebody else, it doesn't concern me what their job role is specifically. It concerns me what they're bringing to be that I can learn from. And so, yes, there is some status that comes along with that. But I think in terms of the values, in terms of specifics that you can get out of the role, and you can build and sort of build your little niche and career where you want to do it, that's very achievable with the route that we've taken. Again, if you wanted to do something that is specifically owned by clinical psychologists in terms of particular assessments, sure. But that isn't the bulk of the work. That's not what most people spend their time. It's not what most clinical psychologists spend their time doing. So I guess to echo your point, which is to say, know why you're doing it, have some sense about, if you can have some sense about why you were doing it and the type of work you want to do, there may be other routes there, and it's not a lesser job when you get there. You're not, oh, I wish I was a clinical psychologist because then I'd be able to do this more. You're not. You can do it in the same way that they do.
Yeah, completely. And I think that leads us probably on to jobs. So what I've done is, let's frame this conversation, because this will lead us into NHS jobs, and we'll have a quick chat about the differences in private practice. And then we end it there. There's no further questions that come through. So let me just share this. So what I've done is I've gone onto the NHS jobs website and I've simply typed in search for CBT. And we can have a look at these days, as in right now in the present, what's available and what is a psychology job and what's a CBT therapist job, because this has changed a bit, I think, over the years now. So if you're thinking about training to be a CBT therapist, then this is what you want to look out for. Things like this: trainee CBT psychological therapist. And what this will be is the clinical placement part of the university course. And all of the university courses are funded at band 6. What's it called? Pay to train? Is that right? Paid to train? Something
so
like that.
You want a training contract, which lasts for the year. You do the course, or however long the course is. You train that, and then, yes, I think usually you then have to apply for a job, but there probably will be a job because they've paid for a course. So, that's the route. You're not tied to it. At least you weren't when I remember people doing it. I didn't apply for one of those because we did it. Well, I did mine when I was in the military, so the military just paid for me to go on the same course as everybody else, but I wasn't tied to it. But my understanding was that people did the training contract, and then the course finishes and the contract ends, and it's a case of applying for jobs at the end of that.
Yeah. And I think when I was relatively at the beginning of my CBT journey, I remember CBT therapists were predominantly band 6s, and I think 6, 7, and I think psychologists were always like 8A and above. There seemed to be a shift at some point where psychologists seem to be coming in at 7s. And
there's,
like psychologists went down and CBT therapists went up, and they became more even, which we'll see
I
in a
think
minute.
it
I think
depends
when we
where
go
you
through
are.
this.
To be
Okay.
honest, I when I did mine, there were lots of sevens around as a CBT therapist. The assumption was you would be a seven, certainly in the Midlands. And then, money cuts, 14 years of austerity and all that. Maybe that's the reason. Who knows? There were there's suddenly band 6 jobs started to appear, but I don't see many of those around anymore. I see band 7 starting for CBT therapists. If you go down south, I think it's a way to bump the money up. You see much more starting on band 8, 8As.
Yeah.
Psychologists starting on, there's often a preceptorship period, isn't there? So they would start potentially, they do their training as a 6. They would then potentially get a job as a 7. They might spend a year or 2 on that, and then potentially apply for a higher banding after that. But there are less 8A, but they do for non-psychologists, but they do exist. I work with people who are 8As and they're not psychologists, and various jobs I see come up around me, and they do tend to be for either becoming there's an element of leading that comes along with that as you're moving forward, or there's working in very complex like as complex treatment services that then start to have a degree of expectation, extra experiences that you need to bring to that, and that's how they attract them. So they do exist.
Yeah, and as we can see here, let me just get rid of this question because I think it might be just in the way. If you live in Kenton Medway or near Kenton Medway, some great opportunities here. So these salaries, I take it that's the band 6 range, because someone might have come from another part of the NHS and is already in this banding. But those are the training salaries, as you can see. So loads of opportunity at Kenton Medway. Black Country, that's up your way, Christian, I think, isn't it? So high intensity CBT therapist. So
that's a band 7 salary.
That's a band 7 banding. So that's so once you've done training, this is what you'd be applying for. So yeah, another band. Oh, Cobham, Warwickshire, up your way still. Oh, Kenton Medway again. Look, some trainee stuff. So you can see the trainees here. There's Humber. So again, same banding. So all of these trainee posts will be band 6s. If we start looking down, you can see the high intensity. So high intensity CBT is what the IAPT course is. And then you have some interesting ones. So you start getting into these kind of jobs, which is CBT psychotherapist, clinical and counseling psychologist. So these jobs, they're saying either they want either a CBT therapist or they want a clinical psychologist. And I wonder if we go into this.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to what
to person
in some roles.
So this is what they want. They want a oh, hold on, my Siri's trying to talk to me. Go away, Siri. They want a core profession, so professional qualification in a core health profession and be registered within their professional body. So they want a core profession, so like an RMN, that list from the BABCP earlier. Is that it? Is that the entire person spec? There's not much detail there, is there?
No. But it does speak
a really bad example.
Stu, it does speak to what we were saying earlier, is it that in plenty of places the roles are fairly interchangeable in terms of what the expectation is of the work. So it can be a counselling psychologist, it can be a clinical psychologist, it can be a CBT. And I like that they've said psychotherapist, because people, I'm reclaiming that for us, because people seem to drop it and think psychotherapy is something different to CBT. CBT is a form of psychotherapy. It's a specific form of psychotherapy. Essentially, if you're doing therapy from a psychological model, you are delivering psychotherapy, of which CBT is one of the main ones. Not what we're talking about, but it annoys me that we sometimes are left out of the idea of the psychotherapy and then the CBT. It's not. Definitely
I think my accreditation certificate actually says cognitive behavioral psychotherapy. Psychotherapist. So here's a good example. So clinical counselling psychologist, CBT therapist. This is in Cambridgeshire. And if we look at this person's spec, which I quite like, so the essential doctorate level training in clinical or applied psychology, including specifically models of psychopathology, clinical psychometrics, 2 or more distinct psychological therapies. So they're being quite specific there about the experience of the person who's done the doctorate level training, because it varies so much. Or you can be a professional trainer which supports the ability to provide high intensity clinical interventions. So that would include us as high intensity CBT therapist. But we also fulfill this one, or PG dip in cognitive behavioral therapy, or its equivalent eligible for BABCP accreditation. So that also applies to us. Or just generally, if you're eligible for BABCP accreditation. So actually, whoever's written this person spec sees all of these things as equal to each other in terms of applying for this specific job. And what they're looking for experience-wise is experience of specialist psychological assessment, formulation and treatment. So that's what you do as a CBT therapist. Experience of working with people with complex and severe mental health problems. So you can see here, experience of working with a wide variety of client groups, can communicate with people, etc. There's nothing else really specific there. Yeah, so again, another job that is very similar and doesn't really differentiate between clinical psychologist and CBT therapist. I don't think we're going to find much outside of that. Again, there's another one here, South London, CBT therapist or a clinical psychologist. This is a band, that's 8A, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
Because it's in London.
Yeah.
So that is pretty, that's okay. Team leader, CBT supervisor. Again, specialist, clinical, counselling, psychologist, or CBT therapist. Let's just look up one more, just see if there's anything that stands out. IAPT, high intensity CBT therapist, band 7. Here's another one in Rotherham, CBT psychotherapist, clinical counselling psychologist, and they're looking at either a 7 to an 8A. Loads of London again, high CBT therapist, clinical counselling psychologist. So as you can see, in terms of getting jobs, they don't differentiate at this level. I think for me, the difference is progressing beyond 7, 8A and above. I think as an 8A, you could probably get, as we've seen here in London, at least you can be a CBT therapist. I think there were some team leader type CBT roles there, which are band 8As. They're in my experience, they're few and far between. I think if you want to progress up the ladder, so to speak, clinical psychology might be a better route for that, but again, it's going to depend on what your specific values are and your goals are around what you actually want to do with your life. Because as you progress, you see less people clinically. They get more.
Either way, it's a movement into management is what's happening. So psychologists, in the same way that CBT therapists. So if you're a CBT therapist and you want to move up and you're moving beyond 8A, then it's probably into some sort of management role that goes along with that. And you're seeing less and less clients at that stage, which is, that's just how the structure works. But the same thing happens to psychologists. They're doing, they're starting to lead services or that kind of thing. So it's either route. There might be more obvious routes for them to go up, but both of those routes take you away from direct client work for most of it. If you get much beyond certainly an 8B or 8C, you're moving beyond direct client work. It's probably also worth pointing out the difference between what's IAPT, what's now called NHS talking therapies, which is what probably most people know, which is nothing wrong with it. That's the 12 to 18 sessions of CBT if you're a high intensity therapist. And that's probably where people are more familiar with the idea of working. It depends on your service, but where people would have the idea of working to more specific protocols. And thinking about doing treatment for specific things like depression or anxiety or PTSD and like single instance and working through it that way, versus other secondary or specialist services like myself and Stu work in, where we work with people over a much longer period. So it's very normal for me to work with somebody for 2 to 3 years with quite complex difficulties that they're working with, multiple difficulties. Where we work much more what we call, we don't need to unpack this word, but transdiagnostically. So you're not just following a specific protocol, but you're coming up with a formulation, an evolving formulation, and looking within that where you can apply the principles and the evidence base for specific interventions to disrupt the wider formulation that you formed and where it would be useful to intervene. Which is a much longer, more complicated piece of work. And just not that people aren't working in IAPT aren't capable of doing that, but we've got the time and the space to do it, and it's a very different way of working. So it's just worth drawing that distinction. And both those options are available to CBT therapists. I know they are because I work as one of them.
And we keep saying IAPT. Like Christian said, IAPT isn't called IAPT anymore. It's now called the NHS Talking Therapies, for anxiety and depression, formerly known as Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, IAPT. I don't know why. I mean, my grammar isn't the best, but there's something about this comma that hurts my brain when I look at this. I don't know what it is. It must be grammatically correct. It's just it just looks odd to me. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm not the person to argue about it, but yeah, it does. But it's also confusing, I think, because lots of places in the NHS deliver talking therapies, including the specialist service I work in.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really help you to make a distinction between services if you don't know anything about them. But yes, that's what used to be called IAPT.
And then there's just a few questions about kind of setting up private practice and how we found that. So I think that's probably worth just a very wider kind of consideration, that the good thing about becoming a CBT therapist, or I guess any kind of my Siri key. There's something I'm saying that keeps activating Siri. It keeps talking to me. Is that you don't just have to work for the NHS. There's obviously the kind of the private sector. So I worked for the Priory for a little while. There's more specific CBT sectors, like there's IESO where you can work online with clients. There's what other like IESO type companies are there? Like Pulse. There's Pulse. Is that one?
There's Pulse. There's Dr. Julian. There are lots of places that will employ you to do this kind of work. I mean, that work is probably mapped on similar to NHS talking therapy. So you're seeing the same kind of clients in the same sort of allotted time to do it. There's also, again, if you're into private practice rather than you can pick up work from insurance companies. Again, it tends to be quite specific work. So lots of car accidents, people with PTSD and that kind of stuff, doing that kind of work. But doing quite focused pieces of work. Again, your 12 sessions, potentially applying for a few more if you need them, but relatively brief work. Lots of stuff, and there's lots of it around. So you could very happily make a living at doing that if you didn't want to have a specific employer and you wanted to pick up contracting work. There is obviously acquiring your own work, setting your own website up, attracting work that way. That's how easy or good that is. I guess it depends how well you run your business. Some people make a roaring success of it. Some people, have elements of it. I have elements of it, but I also still work in the NHS, so I don't. It's not what I'm relying on for my income. But yes, there's lots of different routes you can go. But in terms of how successful is private practice, there's lots of contract work you can pick up as a CBT therapist, particularly if you're an accredited CBT therapist, that will pay you pretty well. And you do enough of it, you'll make a pretty good living. You've obviously got to pay your own sick pay and your own, you don't get sick pay here, but pay your own pension, all that kind of stuff. So there's a balance to be struck. But yeah, you can certainly work outside the NHS pretty easily as a CBT therapist or work for yourself.
Yeah, all great advice. And obviously, like you said, those services tend to pay more, but then you got to factor in kind of pension costs and sick leave and those kind of things. Similar to you, I've done the odd bit of insurance work. I have 2 days private practice, or 2 days a week that I set aside for private practice. The reality is, at the moment, I have a very small caseload because I'm focusing on the last part of my PhD and providing for that. But I'm sure once that's done, I'll open up my private practice a lot more. But I think what that gives me is a lot of flexibility in my kind of personal life, because I'm working 3 days a week, NHS. And then the other 2 days, I can kind of run my own diary there. If I want to book if I want to open it up to bringing in more clients, I can do. If I want to keep my current level of private clients as it is, I can do. If I discharge a private client and I don't want any more, I can do. I don't have to take any more clients on. If I want to take the day off and I've got no bookings in, it's not going to kind of upset anyone that I'm currently working with, I can do that. I'm available for school runs. I'm available to do, bedtime routine, the kids, morning routine. I can just kind of live my life in those kind of 2 days, kind of how I want to. Which is really, really helpful for me and the family. And then I have the 3 days kind of standard kind of work, as you'd imagine, within the NHS, typical kind of 9 to 5. So that, for me personally, works really well. It gives me loads of time I say loads of time. It gives me enough time to study and continue with my learning journey, which is really cool. In terms of, someone asked the question, how long was it until your private practice was profitable? In terms of profitable, then probably pretty quick, because actually you don't need that much to start up once you're an accredited therapist. I mean, you need like either an online platform if you're going to do it online. You need to rent a room if you're going to have a physical location. You need to think about insurance. You need to think about accreditation fees, and things like the ICO for GDPR, DBS stuff. So there's a few kind of annual outgoings, but you'd probably make that money back pretty quick once you get started. So it would technically be profitable. I think the difference would be, is that profit going to be enough to do what you want to do in terms of living the life that you want to live, in terms of meeting the same pay as you could get in the NHS when you think about the full package of pension, sick pay and everything as well. So very quick to be profitable, but maybe it will take a bit longer to establish a decent client base for you to make significantly more than you would in the NHS. That's just my take, but that's because I've got limited time for private clients. I don't know, Christian, if your experience has been any different.
No, I agree. I mean, I'd probably think about the word profitable. I mean, most people are just sole traders working on their own. So when you say profitable, it means can I make a living out of it? Yeah, pretty quickly for most people, particularly if you're willing to take on lots of that contracting work to do it that way, sessional work over people. Again, individual experiences will vary when it comes to people getting their own work and sort of generating it. I think if you're talking about running a business where you get associates and people work for you, that's another level, and I don't work that way, so I wouldn't advise on that. I do know people who do it, and they seem pretty profitable, but they don't open their books up to me, so I don't know exactly how profitable they are. But most people are just sole traders working on their own. They rent a room. Often people rent a room in terms of like when they first start, they pay hourly, so they rent the room for the hour that they see the clients. And it's not until they've got a consistent flow of work then they might get their own room. I certainly wouldn't advise renting an office before you've got some work in the door. But the fixed costs aren't really that much. You're probably talking a couple of grand, just and not all at once, but just to get your insurances in place and to get your ICO and to I don't know, whatever your software and your computer and whatever else you've got to pay for to start with, your accreditation, annual stuff that you have to pay for anyway. All those things added together, it's probably a couple of grand a year.
And speaking about private practices, look what I've just had a little cheeky look at. Let me share my screen. You don't just have to do therapy. You can do training.
Yeah.
So this is your website, Christian. So as you can see, Christian, I'm not talking to you, Christian. I'm talking to the people watching. Unless you didn't know you were running this course. You're running a course on an introduction to acceptance and commitment therapy, 3-hour online workshop. As people know in this channel, this is an ACT channel, so this is kind of what I'm into. When is it? The 10th of July this year. And what I really love about this, and this is what I love about ACT so much, is ACT clinicians, generally speaking, are really open to sharing resources. And something that we try to do is keep training, therapy and things kind of as cost effective and as accessible as we can. And when I noticed, Christian, on yours, and I know we haven't discussed this, but I'm really interested that you've gone for a pay what you want for the course. So that's 3 hours of training, pay what you want. Can you talk a bit about the rationale behind that? I think that's really interesting because training is generally expensive.
Yeah, I haven't invented that. I mean, this is a 3-hour workshop. So the idea with this is, I think it's good within the ACT world. It's trying to build a little ecosystem of people that are into stuff and getting people's, this is an intro, right? So it's getting people's awareness up. It's getting people to start to think in this way, whet their appetite for more as you go along. And I think so there's two things. One is just getting people the information out there. And I think it's good if people don't want to pay and they're happy to come along for free, then I'm okay with that. Right? This is 3 hours of my day. It's not the be all and end all. I'm not living off this. But it gets that stuff out there and people start thinking about it and they might start to access other stuff. But it's just stuff. So my rationale for this is I want more people to know about it. I want them to think about it. I want to think about how it would apply to their work. And then when they start talking about that with themselves and their colleagues and all that kind of stuff, they start to think about, well, maybe this is some work we should bring in and think about. And then they seek out other training, and it's all sort of builds on itself and develops a little ecosystem of people who are into this work and willing to share, but also willing to go to longer trainings, which might come up and which give them more in-depth skills to go along, because they've had an accessible route in to start with. So I think there's a lot to be said for making training accessible in the first place, but particularly making the introductory stuff really accessible, because training can be expensive, and you think about, well, does this interest me? And then you look at it, and an intro day costs you 100, 150 quid to go to, and you go, well, not this month, not next month, and you go, well, that doesn't help me as a trainer, and it doesn't help the ecosystem that we're trying to build in terms of people being interested in it and willing to support each other, and the dissemination of the work. So there's a few of us who do it like this, and just trying to get it out there and make it accessible. There's something about the values in that as well. ACT is being about values. It's just, I haven't always had lots of money like I've got lots of money now. Money has been tighter at various points in my life, and yet I still wanted to have access to things to develop. And I think if we can share bits of that so people can get started, I think that's an important part of my work and giving back. So I do this. I don't think I'm the only person to do it, but it's definitely in that.
That's such a great way to put it. And I love this idea of building like this pro-social community where we're all sharing, we're all kind of involved with each other, especially when times are hard, for lots of people. Is this training, is this aimed at therapists, or would potential clients get anything out of it?
No, so this is definitely for therapists. So it's thinking about how you would apply it. Well, getting an understanding of what it is if you've not looked at it before. Maybe doing a few experiential exercises and just thinking about how this would apply to your work. So it is for, broadly speaking, clinicians. So anybody who works in a sort of professional capacity around people, and they might find those kind of skills useful. I mean, the thing with ACT is it hasn't all got to be full-blown trauma therapy. It can be sort of taking elements of it that you can use in your work. So ACT is used in all kinds of settings, from improving sort of psychological flexibility, so helping people think a bit more flexibly in coaching settings, all the way through to sort of trauma settings where I work. There are elements within that. That's a trauma diagnostic model that you can pick up and take. But I think specifically this is about thinking about how you would apply it as a professional writ large to working with clients. I think it's something useful that I might want to pick up on. That's the idea.
Sounds great. Sounds really helpful for people, as you say. Pay what you want, get some access to some training, could be really helpful. Good stuff. And I think this also shows that, again, just the wide variety of work that CBT therapists can do. Because obviously this is nothing to do with IAPT. It's something that, you are doing in your position as an accredited CBT therapist. Well, I guess you wouldn't even have to be accredited. In fact, I guess you don't have to be a CBT therapist at all to do this training. But if it wasn't for that, you probably wouldn't be doing this. Like, your journey would have been different, perhaps. But just again to show the breadth of the work and I guess the experience that you've had in your career so far, and now you're sharing it with everyone else. Okay, let's do one more question because I'm conscious of the time, and Christian is very kindly sharing his time with us. I don't want to take up his entire evening. Wait, can you see the questions in the chat, Christian?
No.
I don't know. Do you have a? Oh, can you not see them? So, Beth has asked a question. Now, part of my mind is going, don't answer this question because it's just going to lead me into an answer that could potentially get me in trouble. You can't see it, Christian, probably. I'll put it on the screen. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna ambush you here and get you to go first. So I'll put it on screen. I'll answer it. I'm not going to answer it in detail. Beth, I hope that's okay because it's quite a loaded question, I think. You probably haven't done that intentionally, but I think it echoes perhaps some of the feelings in what's going on in the NHS at the moment in terms of kind of CAMS. So this is the question. What's your general view of how CAMS, and I'm guessing you mean child and adolescent mental health there, currently operates within the NHS in relation to CBT provisions and services? And is there anything you would seek to change or improve if you could? So Christian earlier mentioned austerity, that funding has been cut pretty much across the board. Every service is being squeezed for as much as it can. It's trying to be as efficient as it possibly can. It's trying to still provide care to people who need it when they need it as well as they can. Okay. And I think there's a difference here between people on the ground, such as myself, such as Christian, although Christian isn't CAMS, but I work in a CAMS service. Individually, we are all doing the best that we can with what we've got. Is there anything I would seek to change or improve? Yes, more therapists, less waiting times, more accessible, maybe it's not even specifically therapy, but any kind of treatment. I'm hesitant to use that word, intervention. I'm hesitant to use the word, anything that's going to help young people and children, whether it's we can get better information and training into schools. We've got mental health teams going into schools at the moment, whether we can help support parents, whether we can help support families, whether we can get more into kind of the wealth inequality stuff, helping people in periods who live in kind of very deprived areas and perhaps and they are really struggling. That's not to take away from people who don't live in poor areas, because they are struggling as well, but just try to get the more reach and more help to people as we could. That's what I would seek to change or improve. The reality is there isn't enough money for that. So I don't know what we can do about that. I've got no idea. It's very frustrating. I know there are lots of families, there's lots of children who are potentially missing out. And it's a real shame, and we wish we could help everyone. Like, genuinely, we wish we could. I think that's probably an okay answer. I don't think that one's going to get me sacked. I'm very mindful about not bringing my own kind of politics into this, especially with an election around the corner. So I'm going to stay away from that. People can obviously make their decision how they wish. But yeah, my general view is we're not doing enough. We could do more. The reality is I don't know how we could do more with so little funding that's coming in. If anyone's got any ideas in the chat, if anyone after this wants to drop a comment with any ideas, that's absolutely fine. I'm more than willing to have a look and expand my own kind of thought processes and that around this. Christian, have you had time to kind of let this percolate a bit? You don't have to answer if you don't want to. There's.
I don't work in CAMS. I don't work with kids, but I think it's the same answer, which I think you could ask a professional, you could ask the man on the streets, the man or woman on the street, they'd say the same thing, right? You need resources. And I used the word ecosystem earlier. It's not just the service, it's not just the CAM service, it's all the supporting services that sit around that in terms of social care and all the things that you would need to help intervene. It's kids having access to clubs and support services outside and things for them to do, and not healthy food and decent incomes for their family and all the stuff that people need in order to give themselves a decent life in the first place, rather than all that falling into mental health services who are already stretched, trying to solve problems that are so much wider. That's not to let mental health services off the hook. There's always things they can do, but I don't think they can do more on their own. They're dealing with the problem, but the problem isn't created at that level. Right? There's lots of things that we'd want to invest in. But yeah, I don't work in those services, so I can't point to specifics that might be useful to change. But I do know, if there was more funding for lots of things would get easier. And that's all I can say about that, really. It's not a good answer, is it?
Well, I know, and I feel like my answer wasn't very good. It feels like I've kind of skirted around the issue a bit, but the fact is, I don't know. I don't know how to change it. Outside of unrealistic ideas about spending lots and lots and lots of money, and somehow all of these trainees come out from somewhere, I don't have any genuine answers.
Well, I can give you a parallel, right? So the veteran services, and we're hooked up into. It's not perfect by any means, a stretch of the imagination, but who are hooked into quite a lot of charities that exist for the military. And these are things that service people have paid into, or they collect money on behalf of them, and they provide all kinds of additional extra help and support and activities and things that, to help people with their finances, help the people with their shopping, help people with get out and do stuff, reduce isolation, provide clubs, all these kind of things that exist that support people's mental health that we have access to in our service. That people who work in other services, they are gold dust. Try and get a hold of this stuff. The funding isn't there. And all I can know from my experience working in that area is I wish everybody else had that, right? And it's still not enough where I work, right? Even with all of that. But it helps by a very long way when you're not trying to just help people with therapy. Therapy is very important, and it helps people to access and be able to use this stuff. But they do need to have things in their lives and resources to be able to live their lives. And we're lucky enough to have some of that to help them with. Not everybody, as much as they need always, but I know that doesn't exist in the same way for other services. So that alone, if I could translate that into an equivalent for CAMS, which is obviously right across the country and serves a much wider population than we do in my service, would cost a lot of money. I think it's worth it. But yes, that's where I'd start.
And like you said, it's systemic. It's a real systemic problem. It's a tough one. We could talk about this all day. I think there's so much we could unpick around all domains of society that have probably contributed to where we are now. And this isn't the place for it, I don't think. Beth, I really hope that answers your question. I did consider just kind of not sharing it, but I know you've been a supporter of the channel for a while, so just wanted to acknowledge that and kind of give you some kind of answer. I hope that was okay. So I think that was the last question. So I think unless anyone pops anything in the chat in the next few seconds, I think we are probably going to leave it there. Like I said, this wasn't, Christian and I hadn't got together before this. We hadn't thought about the structure for this at all. We had a vague idea that we were going to go through the spreadsheet of questions that had been left, and we were going to have a look at a few jobs. That's kind of all we'd really discussed. The idea was that this was going to be largely led, hopefully, by people asking questions in the chat. Obviously, not many people attended, and that's not like a grumble or anything. That's just people have got lives that they're living out there. I'm sure they've got better things to do than come and watch kind of my face talk for an hour and a half, which is fair enough. So perhaps this might have come across as a little bit kind of clunky and disorganized. That's no reflection on Christian. That's kind of me. I've just invited Christian along and said, hey, do you mind coming along and answering some questions and just having a chat? And he kindly donated an hour and a half of his time for us to do that. So Christian, thank you very much. Nothing's come through in the chat. So I think we're going to end it there. I don't know if you've got any closing comments at all, Christian, before we...
No, but I would say, I'll say no and then I immediately say something. If people have got questions or there's things they would want to have known that we didn't cover, stick them in the comments. I'm sure we could think about covering those at a future date if there's enough sort of demand or stuff that comes up.
Yeah, what I can do, so I had a Google form for this that people filled out to ask the questions. I'll drop a link to that same Google form in the description. People can still fill that out. It auto-populates a spreadsheet. And then what can happen is either Chris and I will get back together if there's enough questions, or if they're relatively short, then I can just make a non-live video, so pre-recorded video answering that question, and I can just put that up on the channel. That might be kind of good enough for people to start going away and having a look and kind of thinking about their journey. But I hope this has given a bit of an overview of kind of the things we do in terms of CBT therapists, the breadth. Christian's got his training, he's got some private practice, he's working for a complex trauma service, veteran service, he's got a website, he's got training coming up. That's a lot of stuff. That's more than just delivering CBT for the NHS. So hopefully there's some food for thought within there. Hopefully we haven't disappointed too many psychologists in this conversation. I'm sure if we have, someone's going to let us know in the comments, but we've been kind of as honest as we can, you know, in our experience. Let's caveat that this is only our experience. Other experiences may vary. I think we're good. Good to go, Christian?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thanks for coming, Christian. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Take care. Have a good evening. Goodbye.